Welcome back, guys, and Happy New Year to everyone. Today we're gonna take a look at Half-Life for the Sega Dreamcast, and we're gonna put that up against the PlayStation 2 version. Now the PS2 version came out in late 2001, while the Dreamcast version never came out and was cancelled just before the release. The game's publisher Sierra cancelled the release because of changing market conditions, which was basically because Sega announced that they will be discontinuing the Sega Dreamcast. The Sega Dreamcast version was so close to coming out that there are actually official strategy guides for the Dreamcast version. Also, the magazines got the review copies in. Here I have the magazine that has a review of Half-Life. They gave it a 9 out of 10. But now, guys, we're gonna put these versions head to head, and this is gonna be part of my video series where we take a look at all the games that released for both systems and compare them. But this is more of a bonus episode because this game never officially came out on the Dreamcast, but still this is pretty much what it would have been if it came out. You can find the playlist for the first 3 episodes down in the description. Also, you can see some information about how I record these systems. This is all real hardware, no emulation here. But now, without further ado, guys, let's jump into the comparison. Okay, so here in the main menu, as you can see, the graphics of the menu look very similar between the systems. But the PS2 menu is a little bit nicer to use. It's a lot more snappy. Everything happens right away when you click, while the Dreamcast has a little delay to everything. And also the PS2 has 16:9 widescreen support here, which is definitely a nice addition to the PS2 version. Other than that, the menus function pretty much the same, but the Dreamcast version does have the additional content Blue Shift here included on the disc. And when it comes to the first loading to the game, the PlayStation 2 version is a little bit faster than the Dreamcast, but that definitely changes once we get to the game and the differences become a lot bigger, and we're gonna take a look at that too. But now let's move on to the gameplay. Okay, so here in the intro scene of Half-Life, this is an on-rails section, but we're gonna take a look at a couple things here already. And if we actually pause the game here, okay, so the PlayStation 2 version is 480i resolution, while the Dreamcast version is 480p resolution. So the Dreamcast version has a higher resolution, but despite that, if you take a look at this rail here, you can see that definitely looks better on the PlayStation 2. So the PS2 version has higher quality textures than the Dreamcast, at least for this specific texture here. Okay, so here I think the Dreamcast higher resolution definitely makes this scene look better on the Dreamcast. For example, this thing here looks a lot more detailed. Also, these textures here look better, and also like the more rusted metal look here on the Dreamcast. Okay, let's take a look at a couple more things from this intro, and then we are gonna move on. Here we have a pretty interesting one. If we pause the game once again, and looking from here further away, the door on the Dreamcast definitely looks more detailed. But then again, if you take a look at the floor textures and this texture here, the PS2 definitely looks so much better. And this is true for many Dreamcast games I have noticed. Looking textures from further away, they look blurry. And once you get closer, they start to get the detail in. And I don't know what causes this. It may be because of the texture compression the Dreamcast uses, but still, it's noticeable in many games. Here, as we start to move, the Dreamcast textures also are getting better here. And also, as we get right next to this door, you can once again see the PS2 having more detail because of the higher textures, even though Dreamcast has a higher resolution. Also, I like the PS2 look here on the Tuno much more than on the Dreamcast. Here inside the facility, the Dreamcast version definitely looks a lot sharper here. And the versions have a little bit different wall and roof textures here, and the PS2 also has some added lights here, but overall Dreamcast sharper. Otherwise, I'd prefer PS2. Okay, so here as we go back and forth on the Dreamcast version, you can see this line from where the textures get blurry, which is kind of weird. And this is not the only game that I have noticed this in on the Dreamcast. While on the PS2 it looks a lot better, and also the floor textures, as you can see, a lot better on the PS2. Okay, here we're gonna take a look at the power suit when you first go pick it up, and we're gonna pause the gameplay here just to take a better look at the suits. And the PC original, these suit colors are somewhere in between both of these, but I still think the Dreamcast looks more of that classic orange look here.
maybe than the PS2. The PS2 suit definitely has more details in it, but the Dreamcast version suit all looks a lot sharper here thanks to the higher resolution. And also one thing to note here is that if you look at the texture under the suit on the PS2, it looks way better than on the Dreamcast. Okay, but now we're gonna move on to a different scenes here, and we're gonna go towards the test chamber and take a look at a couple things on the way there. So yeah, let's keep it moving.
Now as we come up to this security guard here and we pause the game once again, guys, take a look at the ground textures here again. On the PlayStation 2 it looks way better than on the Dreamcast, and also if you look behind this glass door here and look at the ground textures there, it's the same thing. The PS2 looks way better than the Dreamcast. But then again, if you take a look at the textures next to the door, the wall textures, it's actually a little bit better on the Dreamcast, which is strange. Now, let's focus on this security device here. As you can see, they definitely changed the design here on the PlayStation 2, because the Dreamcast one looks like the PC version, while on the PS2 they added some nice details here, and it definitely, in my opinion, looks better on the PS2. And here you have the PC version. And one thing I also noticed here is that on the consoles, the game does not cast a shadow under the security guard like it does on the PC version. And here we have also the Black Mesa next to these other systems, which is basically a community-made remake of this game, and Valve does sell this on the Steam, so definitely check it out. It's a fantastic remake of this game, and it changed some things, but still it is pretty faithful while looking a lot better than the original versions. But now let's focus on these two consoles here, and let's take a look at the animation that happens when the security guard uses this device. I think that's also a little bit better on the PS2. So let's take a look at that right now. Okay, the footage is slowed down so you can see it a little bit better, but as you can see there are some additional animations on the PS2 when the device closes. But yeah, let's keep it moving. Here's also the same scene, how it looks on Black Mesa, the remake. Okay, so here guys, as you can see, the PS2 does not necessarily always have the higher or better detailed ground textures. As you can see right here, the Dreamcast actually has a lot more detailed ground textures here, and also the character models to me look a lot better here on the Dreamcast, mostly thanks to the higher resolution. Okay, just for fun, here you can see how the same scene looks on the remake Black Mesa. And after this we're gonna move on to the test chamber and take a look at a few more comparisons here, and then we're gonna talk about the controls and how the game feels to play and stuff like that. So yeah, let's keep it moving. Okay guys, here we have PlayStation 2 version, Dreamcast, original PC version, and the Black Mesa remake all side by side, so you can see for yourself how these compare in this scene. And one thing to note here is that the electricity effect on the PS2 looks almost the same as on the original PC version, while on the Dreamcast it's definitely a little bit different and not so aggressive like on the PC and PS2. I really like the PS2 and PC effect more here, but otherwise the Dreamcast version is definitely sharper than the PS2 version here. Okay, so here we have this scene, and take a look at the differences yourself. But one thing I'm gonna note here is that the Dreamcast frame rate dips a lot lower than the PS2 in this scene. Okay guys, this has already taken me so long to do, and with my limited free time I can't really stretch this too much longer. But let's take a look at a few more things here before we wrap up the video. Now this is a big one and definitely tips the scales for PS2's favor. In the beginning of the video I talked about the initial loading to the campaign being pretty much comparable between the systems, but when you are in-game the differences become way bigger than that. Not only are the Dreamcast loading times 5 to 6 times longer than the PS2, they are very frequent in this game, the loading scenes. They happen every few minutes when you go to a new area. Every time you backtrack, you're gonna have to load again. a lot of loading in this game, and in this area the PS2 version definitely is a way better than the Dreamcast version. But now we don't want to watch the loading screens here, so let's move on and take a look at the couple of the smaller details in this game, and we're gonna also talk about the frame rate and controls in this game. Okay, now let's take a look at a couple of the smaller details here, and first how it looks when you break the glass in this game with the crowbar. And here you can see that both versions actually do have a similar, it looks kind of similar on both, but on the PS2 the glass pieces are much larger than on the Dreamcast, and personally I definitely do prefer how it looks on the PS2, but you can decide for yourselves right here. Okay, there you have it. Now let's take a look at how it looks when you hit the walls, for example, with the crowbar. I mean, who cares about that? I don't know, but well, let's take a look at it anyways. So here you have it, and yeah, it looks pretty much identical between the systems, so there's not too much to talk about here. So let's keep moving. Here you can see the health station, which is basically just a texture on the Dreamcast, while on the PS2 it is an actual 3D object with some animation, and you can also see the health liquid inside the machine, which is a pretty nice touch on the PlayStation 2. Here you can also see the gun models. They are exactly the same, but it does look a little bit better on the Dreamcast in my opinion because of the higher resolution. Okay guys, now I'm gonna move on from talking about the graphics and focus more on the frame rate. In this scene, here you can see there's no action whatsoever, but still the Dreamcast is dropping a lot more frames here than the PlayStation 2. Okay, so let's take a look at a few more scenes here where you can definitely see the smoothness difference between these systems, and this definitely affects the how the game feels to play, and PlayStation 2 is always better when we talk about the frame rate. Now we're gonna use the handgun, and there's not a lot of action going on a bit here, but still you can see the Dreamcast starts to drop a lot of frames even in a simple scene like this, and it definitely makes the Dreamcast version a lot less responsive in situations like this. Okay, now let's take a look at a couple more scenes here where you can definitely see the smoothness difference between these two systems before we wrap up this video. Okay, here you can see a few scenes and take a look at the smoothness difference between the systems. I'm not going to talk about graphics here anymore, but you can take a look at those also yourself here. But now I want to talk about the controls. First of all, I want to mention that both of these versions support mouse and keyboard. And if you use those, then the controls are pretty much equal. But if you use the controllers that come with the systems, then the PS2 plays way better than the Dreamcast version, mostly thanks to the two thumbsticks, which really helps in a game like this, but also because there are more buttons on the PS2 controller. Some of the actions are easier to do on the PS2, whereas on the Dreamcast you may need to press a specific button and then, for example, use the D-pad to browse through your weapons, for example, and that definitely makes it a lot harder to learn controls, and also just overall not as good as on the PS2. Both of these versions do have a auto aim option to help you with aiming, and that definitely makes both of the versions actually more enjoyable to play. And even the Dreamcast version using the controller, it's definitely playable, but I much prefer the PS2 and how that controls compared to the Dreamcast. When it comes to the graphics of this game, I have to say that there are many scenes where the Dreamcast looks better than the PlayStation 2, but I mean, overall the PS2 is just so much smoother than the Dreamcast, and the loading times are so much faster on the PS2 that it definitely makes a big difference, especially in a game like this where you have tons of different loading scenes, and PS2 is way faster in those loading scenes compared to the Sega Dreamcast.
but in my opinion, the PS2 version is the way better game here than the Dreamcast version. But yeah, this video took so much longer to put out than I wanted to, so I definitely want to make the next one a lot faster than this one. But thank you so much, guys, for watching this video, and check the description down below to check the previous episodes. I'm gonna now leave you here with a couple different scenes that I deleted from the previous section. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.